Good evening. I'm Steve Weberg. I'm with the public affairs staff of the Kansas City Public Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. You've heard me talk many times about our appreciation and admiration for our partner tonight, U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. One of our closest partners in our signature event series going back to 2008. I and all of us at the library are feeling especially appreciative tonight, coming off of Veterans Day on Friday. All of us have benefited from this amazing roster of military historians that the Command and General Staff College shares with us for these events, for these programs. And we have another tonight in Dirk Ringgenberg. But let's not forget that in many cases with these individuals from the Command and General Staff College, the many years of active military service, often decades of active military service, and often in military engagement that these individuals have given to our country. And a number of them are with us tonight, and I'd really like to ask you to join me in expressing our appreciation for them. So Dirk Ringgenberg, who's speaking here for the first time with the library, certainly deserves every bit of that applause and more. A retired U.S. Army major, he spent 24 years as an infantry officer, serving 4 combat tours in the Gulf War, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq again. He was awarded the Silver Star for Gallantry and the Bronze Star for Valor, both as a paratrooper company commander during very intense fighting in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan in June 2005. Now, the Silver Star commendation notes that his platoon, which was outnumbered by the enemy in a 7-hour firefight, persevered and destroyed Taliban leadership that, quote, had terrorized local populace for months. The commendation goes on, quote, his leadership was the decisive point to his company's overwhelming success, and, quote, in keeping with the finest traditions of military service. Today, Dirk is an assistant professor at the Army Command and General Staff College, and he specializes in the field of military technology. So to be sure, we really could have no better guide in assessing the 2001 film Black Hawk Down, which is an account, of course, of the horrible 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, which cost the lives of 18 Americans and wounded another 70. But more than that, we really could have no better, more distinguished representative of our great U.S. military history. So we're honored to have him with us, and would you please join me once again in now welcoming Dirk Ringgenberg to the library. Dirk, it's great to have you here. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to everybody, and thanks for coming out tonight. I know the weather is starting to become a challenge, but you know, here in the Midwest, an inch or two of snow is just a dusting, right? On behalf of the Command and General Staff College, I would like to just thank the Kansas City Public Library for hosting this event and allowing us to come and talk a little bit about a movie that represents a historical event, and one that's fairly near and dear to my heart is Black Hawk Down. The official Army terminology would be Operation Gothic Serpent. The Somalis themselves would call it the Day of the Ranger. The men that participated in this event would call it the Battle of the Black Sea, which refers to the market area that we're going to talk about. Black Hawk Down comes from the book written by Mark Bowden, where he interviews those individuals involved, and the terminology Black Hawk Down was that radio call that went across when the first of 2 of these helicopters were shot down. The call goes across the radio, there's a Black Hawk down, means crashed, and then actions go after that. Jerry Bruckheimer read some of Mark Bowden's dispatches that he had in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is where Mark Bowden originally started the story. It didn't start out as a book. It started out as a series of stories. Jerry Bruckheimer, producer, famous for many movies, Top Gun being one of them, latched on to this idea, and this was 1999, that there was a story here that had a lot of emotional attachment to it. He then signs on Ridley Scott to direct. The stories from the Philadelphia Inquirer are then purchased to become a book, albeit at a smaller purchasing firm. And Mark Bowden publishes the book almost in tandem with the creation of the movie, which comes out, the book in 1999. The movie premieres in December 2001, right on the heels of great national tragedy of 9/11. You can find a lot of writing about the movie online. This is an endless topic for conversation, certainly to the individuals that were present, but to others. Those who look at the movie in the vein of 9/11 and walk away with some of the ill-begotten idea that, well, this is a pro-war movie. Usually when I hear that, I actually have to ask, have you watched the movie? Because as we all kind of know, that this is a very visceral experience that you go on. Part of that being that was the intention of the movie the whole time. Now, one of the themes we're going to have is that there's 450 individuals who go to Somalia as part of Task Force Ranger to execute Operation Gothic Serpent. Of those 450 individuals, Mark Bowden is able to write about 90 of them in some shape or fashion in his book, Black Hawk Down. And the movie then is only able to cover about 30, maybe a little bit less individuals in detail. This is the historical paradox. We have this massive, very complicated event that has lots of individuals, and we are only going to be able to talk about it in a movie, show you in about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now, there has since been an extended version and some other things happening, but at the time, this is what we are left with. So Mark Bowden, the producers, the filmmakers, Ken Nolan, who writes the screenplay, they're challenged with telling a very complex, gritty story, and they're forced to make some decisions as they're doing it. Probably the first and foremost is they're going to have to combine some of the characters. And that's going to be one of the themes we're going to see going through the movie. But the main point is, as Roger Ebert, formerly a famous movie critic, says, this is not necessarily a history of the facts, it's a history of the emotion. That feeling what it's like to be a U.S. service member in a very claustrophobic, very intense environment over a period of about 18 hours. How does that feel? Has that ever been captured? We've had certain movies in the past that capture certain events. Platoon, Oliver Stone, some of these other ones, but spread out over many months in time during the movie. This is a movie where it feels like it's in real time. And the director and everybody involved understood what the sole purpose was. You are going to walk away and you're going to understand what it feels like to be a U.S. service member in this situation. Now, there are a few historical things we'll talk about. I'm going to demonstrate a few things. I brought a display in the background so you can actually have that somewhat hands-on experience to see what the soldiers were wearing, to look at some of the gear they had, and to get into that mindset. Now, a little truth in lending. That was me and my lovely wife, Michelle, who's in the audience, in 1993, just before these events happened. I was an enlisted squad leader in 2nd Ranger Battalion up at Fort Lewis, Washington. These events happened to the members of the 3rd Ranger Battalion stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. I remember when this happened, what we had to go through, and understanding, training as those young Rangers did, what they were experiencing. The story goes a little bit more. I then go to officer candidate school. I'm commissioned as an officer, and later I am assigned to the 3rd Ranger Battalion to Bravo Company, which is the company this happened to in 1998. So I had the great opportunity of serving with individuals like Matt Eversman, who is a central character in here. And as we know, and you will find out, he does not look much like Josh Hartlett, who is the key actor, much to his chagrin. Now, just a little bit of background. How did we get to Somalia, and where exactly did this happen? Now, Somalia has been in the news quite a bit lately, and it's not that far of a stretch to say more people know where this is at now than certainly they did in 1993. Coming off the heels of the Gulf War in 1991, the U.S. military was in this world dominance position, and we were able to force project just about anywhere. Somalia, being a very remote Horn of Africa country, very poor, going through a difficult transition, failed state. Into this failed state, we have this individual move in. There were several coups, government's been dissolved. Mohammed Farah Aidid, the clan leader of the Haber Gidear clan, seizes power inside of Mogadishu, and he begins to push back against the UN efforts to feed the starving country. Those efforts lead to a confrontation. His forces kill several UN peacekeepers. This leads to a request for forces. The Clinton administration obliges. They put together what's called Task Force Ranger. That's a combination of the U.S. Army Rangers, one company, approximately 150 soldiers, one squadron of Delta operators, the United States' most elite fighting force, a large contingent of helicopters out of the Special Operations Helicopter Detachment known as Task Force 160. There are 4 Navy SEALs that are part of this. There are several Air Force pararescue and an assortment of medical personnel and other individuals assigned to this 450-person organization. Now, right there, that's one of the shortcomings that we have to understand when we talk history. Lots of these individuals, certainly the SEALs who are part of this, get very little mention either in the narrative or in the movie. But they are part of this. It's quite a joint operation that's happening. Now, Aidid knows they're coming. Aidid knows that the U.S. has a history of, when we take casualties, there is going to be either a pullback or more fighting. He is counting on the former. He is trained in the Soviet Union. He has experience, and he has ideas of how he's going to deal with this new threat coming in to his rule. The Rangers arrive in August of '93, but prior to that, the U.S. does have forces in the region. There are things that are happening. The escalation really takes place in June of '93 when the Pakistani soldiers are killed, and then UN Charter 837, Resolution 837, authorizes the use of force to bring Aidid to justice. So this is not a U.S. unilateral operation. President Clinton agrees. It's through the UN. We provide the forces because we have that force capability, projection power. And we go where we're told. In September of that year, there is an incident that eerily foreshadows what is getting ready to happen. This, in October 3rd, when the Rangers Task Force Ranger loses its Black Hawk, that's not the first time. There is a Black Hawk shot down with the exact same technique, using a rocket-propelled grenade to fire into the rotors, that happens. Task Force Ranger is aware of this, but it's considered an isolated incident. Now, before we get into what's happening, there's a couple of key characters that I would like to point out. Major General William F. Garrison is a career special operations soldier who is in charge of Task Force Ranger. In the movie, he is portrayed by Sam Shepard. He is not interviewed by Mark Bowden, nor does he give any interviews based on his position. In the movie, most of the dialogue that you hear from the actor, Sam Shepard actually comes up with this himself, that fits the feeling of the moment. Our second thread that we're going to kind of explore is that there is a lot of dialogue that is really internal monologue brought forth so that you, as the viewer, are really immersed in the ideas that the soldiers have in their heads. This is one of the first examples. Early in the movie, General Garrison has a conversation, and we'll see this in a clip here in a second, the trailer, that doesn't actually happen. The sentiments, though, are probably very authentic. And as a movie viewer, this is one of the things you have to realize when you're watching this. Did he really say this to this individual, or is this setting the tone for what's getting ready to happen? Garrison sets the tone, and certainly Sam Shepard, the actor, follows along with that. Now, as I said, Task Force Ranger is very reliant on helicopters. This is the package that goes to Somalia from Task Force 160. These are Black Hawk helicopters, but heavily modified. They're armored, they have advanced night navigation systems, they have M134 minigun machine guns mounted on each side, and they have a lot of redundant systems. Complementing the Black Hawks are these helicopters in the middle, the Little Birds, the AH-6 and MH-6 variant helicopters that are essentially a Bell leftover Vietnam version that were used, again, highly modified to fit the special operations need. These helicopters can land on the small, narrow streets or on top of a building, and the pilots that pilot them are the best in the U.S. Army. The package is pretty big. We're going to concentrate in the story on about 4 or 5 of the helicopters that are used on this mission. Not all of them are used. And 2 of them are going to be shot down. Most of the others are going to be heavily damaged. The Little Birds, because they're nimble and they're extremely hard to spot, especially at night, are going to get away unscathed, but they're also going to be the ones that provide all of the firepower that are going to be used to suppress the enemy, the Somali forces that are coming after the Rangers. The preferred method of going in on the helicopters is with the doors open and the soldiers sitting right on the edge. They're going to have their ropes, because they're going to slide down ropes. If you look at my mannequin when we're done, there's 2 pair of big gloves. That's what they use to clutch onto the rope. Use their feet and just slide down. It's called fast roping. Very quick way to get out of a helicopter. The only quicker way is if you don't touch anything and gravity takes over. This actually happens to one of the soldiers on Chalk 4 initially, when Blackburn falls because of the dust and hits the ground. But the soldiers are sitting, literally hanging out the edge of the helicopter as they insert. Here's the Little Birds. The MH-6s, the Delta operators are sitting on pods, planks, on either side of the helicopter, and that's how they're inserting. And from experience, this is a very exhilarating ride, minus weather like tonight. Then it is not. It is not at whatsoever very hua, as the Army would like to say. They have the capabilities of roping. You see the little pylons on these as well, but most of the time they'll land and take off. They're very quick, very nimble helicopters. I have a model of the attack version in the back if you would like to take a closer look. The lift versions can carry 4 fully armed, fairly buff Delta operators. The attack version has rockets and 2 M134 miniguns. Now the minigun, and I've mentioned it before, that is a 6-barreled electric, General Electric, Gatling gun that fires between 2,000 and 6,000 rounds a minute. And there's 2 of them on either side of the attack version, which is my model. Task Force Ranger arrives and they're very busy right off the start. They're conducting several operations literally from the minute they get in country. As you can see, there are multiple objectives they're hitting. Most of these are at night. This is the preferred method for the Rangers and the Delta operators. Certainly the Task Force 160 are fully capable of flying in any weather. Nighttime is the preferred. On October 3rd, though, this changes as a target of opportunity comes up, and it's during broad daylight. So there's the risk that comes in. And General Garrison is the one that makes the call. The code word is Irene to launch the assault.
You shouldn't have come here. This is our war, not yours.
300,000 dead and counting. That's not a war, Mr. Ito. It's genocide.
These people, they have no food. We can either help, or we can sit back and watch a country destroy itself on CNN.
Rangers, Deltas, today we go.
Name?
Blackburn.
Date of birth?
2/27/75.
I was trained to fight. You trained to fight, Sergeant?
I was trying to make a difference.
So guess what? You're going out today.
What?
It's what you wanted, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah.
Just remember when everybody else is shoot in the same direction. You ever shot at anybody before?
No, Sergeant.
Me neither.
Once that first bullet goes past your head, politics go right out the window.
Hey, baby, it's me. You there? Pick up if you're there.
I love you, baby.
RPG! Hold on! 6 Sparks, go down! Got a Black Hawk down. Black Hawk
My
down.
men are surrounded by thousands of Somali militia. I need help now.
Where's the rescue squad? We're in.
I can't do it.
It's what you do right now that makes a difference.
People ask me, why do you do it, man? They want to understand it's about the men next to you.
Don't let that man crawl! Somebody help that man!
That's all it is.
No one gets left behind, you know that.
Nobody asks to be a hero. It just sometimes turns out that way.
Wow, the original 2001 clip, still, if that doesn't make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, I'm not sure what will. Very evocative, very encapsulating of what's getting ready to happen. The history, again, is a matter of hours that we're going to be watching. And the characters, although there is dialogue, and I like to say young Rangers really don't have dialogue they talk about that's very worldly at that point in time. It's a little more crude, but nonetheless, you can understand there's a sentiment that they're trying to get across, that this is a noble cause that they have been sent there for, and that in their minds, many of them understand that. They may not actually have articulated that to one another, but that's kind of beyond the point of what we're getting ready to experience. Certainly, some conversations, never leaving a man behind is very powerful. That's actually part of the Ranger Creed, now part of the Army Creed, that the Rangers say every day, never leave a fallen comrade. And this is something that they are ingrained to believe, and they do believe it. But specifics when it comes to dialogue and how they're interacting with one another, yeah, we can say as historians, that's not following exactly who said what to whom, but the sentiment is certainly as powerful as anything you're going to get. Real quick, there are more individuals involved in this battle than what are represented in the movie and in the book. This is a controversy at times. The 10th Mountain Division has a large amount of soldiers not far, and as you can see on my map, the big thing I want you to understand is the scale. The Rangers, where they take off and then eventually hit the Olympic Hotel, which is up in the center there, it's about a little over a mile away. The problem is the city is a maze. And the Somalis, certainly the Haberngiddier clan, are preparing for the Rangers to eventually come in. And they're creating a labyrinth of blocks and a labyrinth of roadblocks that the soldiers can't get around. Most of the movie, you probably don't know where you're at. That's intentional because the soldiers, the Rangers and the Delta operators and everybody else really didn't know where they were at either. That is one of the things I give a very high mark to the movie. Hey, that's absolutely accurate. This is in the days before GPS. You couldn't just turn your watch on from Garmin and say, here's where I'm going. They had to have maps and they had to be directed from the air. And this is an issue that is extremely accurate in the movie. More kind of down to the ground level, as the helicopters go in, I just want you to kind of look at the geometry of what's happening on the ground. The target area is in the middle. The 4 helicopters are putting in a perimeter, if you can think of it that way. The Rangers are the perimeter. The Delta operators are going into the middle and they're snatching. The mission on 3 October was to seize 2 of Adid's lieutenants. The mission was a success. They got them. A ground convoy then was to leave, follow that 1.5 mile path into the Olympic Hotel, load up the Rangers who had fast roped in, because unless you're really good at climbing, there's no way, a fast rope really only goes one way. Now, you can be extracted, but that wasn't part of the plan. The ground convoy was going to pick everybody up and head back to base. It was going to take about an hour. The first part of it worked perfectly. A couple of the glitches up on top at Chalk 4, this is Matt Eversman's position. A soldier falls. Blackburn misses the rope, falls, and is injured very badly. This is that scene, if you remember. The other thing that happens that isn't well represented is the communications suddenly have a problem. The soldier with the more powerful radio, and I'll just put it that way, I'll spare you the doctrinal terminology, his radio takes a shot and is knocked out. Kind of a random round hits it. They can no longer talk very long distance. Matt is forced to use a smaller radio that's meant for very close distance, and then we start to have communication problems. This is one of the key scenes right here. Blackburn's injured, radio starts to have problems, things start to happen. Now, Matt Eversman is portrayed, that's the real Matt Eversman over on the right, who I got to serve with, great American, and does speaking tours. If you go on YouTube, you can see quite a bit. But the Matt you see in Black Hawk Down is a composite character. The actions that you see happening are him and Lieutenant DiDamaso and Lieutenant Perino. He's actually 3 people in his actions. This is one of the criticisms that often comes across. But again, 450 individuals, we're down to 100 in the book, 90 to 100, and in the movie we're only going to be able to talk about 20 or so that you as the audience are going to be able to keep track of and empathize with. We empathize with the situation that Matt is in. If it's 3 different people, we're going to lose a little bit of that empathy that happens. Lieutenant Colonel McKnight is portrayed by Tom Sizemore. He is the battalion commander, Ranger battalion commander. He's in charge of the convoy. He is also a composite. In the movie, he goes out, comes back, he's wounded in the neck, and then he goes back out. As we're going to talk about in a little bit, that's not exactly what happened. Composite. The second time he goes out, that's actually the 10th Mountain Battalion Commander, Bill David. And we'll talk more about the 10th Mountain here in a second. What exactly are they facing? Now, the locations they picked to film the movie obviously are not back in Somalia. The building structures are a little bit big. The atmosphere is a little more controlled. The ground that we'll see, and I'll show you some photos, is a little more hectic, but nonetheless, the feel of what they're getting into, that claustrophobia, and the massive amounts of individuals attacking them, very well portrayed. The armament, the intensity of the Somalis who are now coming, those that were Haber-Gideon clan, and others, when their families are hit, suddenly now have an enemy. So the fight just starts to get bigger and bigger. The Delta operators are the ones wearing the black soccer helmet or black skating helmets. I have one in the back you can check out. Those aren't bulletproof. Those are meant to protect their head if they bump into things and move around. They find themselves out on the street, the older, more experienced, taking charge of lots of smaller groups of younger rangers and making things happen. Probably the best demonstration of unit cohesion and how these individuals operate on film. They went through training at Fort Benning from actual Rangers. Those Delta operators actually went and did training with the real Delta operators. The Army supported this endeavor. There was a catch to it, though, and we're going to talk about that in a second. All manner of their gear was scrutinized. So as a historian who actually knows these types of things, fantastically well done. Minus the fact that they wrote their names on their helmets and not just their helmet bands, which we'll talk about in a second. But again, that's for you, the audience, to make sure you don't lose track of who's who when they start getting sweaty and dirty and blood spattered. Now, we're going to watch a clip here. This is going to be one of the Little Bird attacks at night. And then I'm going to explain a technique that was modified so you as the viewer are able to keep track. Now remember, those Little Birds had 2 electric miniguns, and they were probably firing their max amount, 6,000 rounds a minute, 2 of them on each side, and then there were 2 helicopters coming in. There's a sequence now where the Rangers, they are encircled, and they are holed up in a building waiting, trying to get that relief convoy, and this is about 5 hours into the fight.
This is Barber 5-2 in position for gun run.
Jesus Christ, look at that.
This is 2-5. I can see you. You're right above me.
Eversman, I can't tell who's who down there. Too much activity.
I'll mark the target with the strobe. Over.
Roger that.
You see it?
Nah, I can't see shit.
I'm putting it on the roof. You're gonna need some help. Cover me.
position. I got the target. We're inbound hot. Y'all keep your heads down. We're coming back around.
I'll leave it right there on General Garrison. Now, General Garrison, he's in the rear back at the airfield watching all this unfold. There are assets that are filming, or actually that he's able to see some of this, and he's listening to the radio conversations. At no point does he get on the radio and talk to anybody, but again, to keep from getting too many characters involved, Sam Shepard, the actor, has a lot of dialogue. Now, for those of you who don't know what was happening, this is a strobe light. This is the tool that they were using to try to mark where the enemy was at. Now, there's a complicated old technique that is used, and that there are some things that are changed so that we prevent that. There is an IR cover that goes over this that you can only see through night vision. This is used to mark your position. And in the book and in actuality, the Rangers marked their own position with the light so that the enemy was then anybody not within that. You had one on one into your position and one on the other, so to speak. That would have been easy to do, but it would have not had that kind of evocative, the soldier has to run out, make a stand, throw it up, so that you get the idea that they're trying to deconflict these extremely deadly flying machines that nobody can see once it becomes night. So the strobe light is a very interesting way to try to bring that across. And it's still, you know, there are some new techniques now, but that's certainly one of them. As I said, the 10th Mountain is down in one corner. We also have, at this time, the Malaysian and Pakistani armored forces that are being spun up, that are being requested to now come to the assistance of the Rangers. Contrary to a lot of popular belief, the 10th Mountain Division knew there was an operation going. They had a quick reaction force that tried to come into the city from the west side, but they were ambushed as well. They were in a lot of fighting themselves. Here is the crash site of Super 6-8, the name of one of the helicopters that was shot down. You could see what the area kind of looks like. Fantastically confusing when you're on the ground trying to make it to that location. Or think about you're in the air flying over trying to direct someone into that location. So the actual photo of where it was at. Now, one of the other main storylines is that of extreme valor. The key one being Shugart and Gordon, the two Delta operators that knowingly fast rope into a position to try to defend Durant, Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant, who is still alive but hurt very badly. Very key event that happens. They give their lives. He is then captured. Durant is captured by Adid's forces. Well, he's captured by a local clan who then lose him, and then Adid buys him back, all in a short amount of time. But he is the only one that survives from his crew. Both Shugart and Gordon will go on to be awarded the Medals of Honor. And one of the sad postscripts of this is one of their bodies is actually one of the ones you see being drugged through the streets the following day. This is what the Black Hawk looked like once it was recovered and destroyed by the ground forces. They blew it up, it stayed in that location and burnt down. Now, the minor controversy that the Army has said that we want you to take care of so that we'll allow you to use the helicopter involves this individual right here. The soon later Obi-Wan Kenobi actor who portrays an individual named Grimes. Now, Grimes doesn't exist. In the movie, Grimes does some valorous stuff and is awarded a Silver Star. In reality, his name was Stebbins. Before the movie comes out, after the book is published, Stebbins is convicted of raping his daughter. He spends 15 years at Fort Leavenworth and is released. The Army says, we'll support this, but you're going to change that name. And that's what happens. That's why you have a Grimes who is in there. Everything he did was exactly right. And then, of course, who can forget Hoot? Now, most of the Delta operators in the movie, their names are all changed, somewhat. Hoot portrays, many of them are now retired, so Hoot portrays a guy that was actually named Hoot N, who actually has a good bourbon you can buy online called Hootin'. So he is again, amalgamation of several people, and the name has changed a little bit. But the actions that he does are very accurate if it's considered to be several individuals. Now, of course, what gets shortchanged in the entire episode, and there have been some corrections, is that the 10th Mountain Division has a much larger role. And as in the book and in the movie, this inter-rivalry is a bit overplayed. Again, internal monologue used as external dialogue to kind of paint a picture. 10th Mountain soldiers, they fight, they are part of the relief column along with other Rangers at the end, and they do a very good job under very difficult situations. To include their attack aviation. Cobra helicopters work in with the little birds, and they're fighting right alongside them. But for brevity, obviously in the movie, we don't see this aspect.
You going back in?
There's still men out there. God damn. When I go home, people ask me, hey, who? Why do you do it, man? Why? You some kind of war junkie? I won't say a goddamn word. Why? They won't understand. They won't understand why we do it. They won't understand it's about the men next to you. And that's it. That's all it is. Hey, don't even think about it, all right? I'm better on my own. Hey, we started a whole new week. It's Monday.
All right. Very, very accurate portrayal of an inner monologue. That conversation never really happened, but that sentiment, every single soldier conveyed that at one time or another in their interviews, when Mark Bowden talked to him, and as someone who's experienced similar. That's a very powerful ending to the movie. This is what it's about. It's about the man on your left and right. If you walked away from this movie and you had that feeling like you could understand just a little bit of what the soldiers go through, then you have achieved that historical perspective that both the producers and the soldiers wanted you to walk away with. The minor inaccuracies, I believe, are minuscule compared to that emotional connection you now have. Yes, it's unfortunate that there are events that have to be modified so that this point gets across, but in 2.5 hours, it's really about what you walk away from it with. Did that battle happen on 3 October 1993? Did those 19 Americans die, and a couple, one of the Delta operators 2 days later, 2 men from the 10th Mountain Division, the Rangers, the pilots. Yes, that all happened. That is absolutely true. And almost all of their deaths were shown in the movie. Some of the events of some of the soldiers, other soldiers, were combined so that you could understand as a viewer what it was like. Now, I tell people the only thing's missing is the smell. Something about in combat, everything smells terrible. And they mention that, the soldiers bring that up quite a bit in the book, which I found, as I reread it, found that very interesting. Here are those individuals just from Task Force Ranger that were killed. Just in the last year or two, Black Hawk Down, the Battle of Black Sea came around again. The Army reviewed a lot of the awards that the surviving soldiers received and upgraded almost all of them. Very well deserved. The 10th Mountain has put out their own documentary indicating what they have done, which was as important as what Task Force Ranger went through. And these are starting to really build a little bit more. There's lots of videos you can go online and watch interviews with the participants. They'll pick out little things that Mark Bowden got wrong or somebody got right. Most of it's because of memory. A soldier, one of the Rangers said this, but his angle was looking differently. And we as historians understand that and can see this. But again, does not take away from what happened. And with that, I would be glad to answer your questions.
Thanks so much, Dirk. We've got 2 microphones here in front. We are recording this, video recording it, so we do ask you to use the microphones so that your voice can be picked up.
If I might, I'd like to ask somewhat of a big picture question. I know this is an operational lecture, but if you look at what happened later on in Somalia and everything, was this operation worth what these guys went through, do you feel?
Well, I'm a historian, so I would tell you it's going to be 100 years before we know what the actual outcome of the event was. Yes, sir.
I had 2 questions, and they're both out of ignorance. When I saw that movie, it seemed to me like they were using some sniper rifles, which wouldn't have seemed appropriate to me. Were they Barretts? I don't know if that's even correct. I didn't see any of those in your clips. But the second one was the credits after the movie or whatever. It seems like it said there were 1,000 Somalis killed in that action.
Yeah, that's a conservative estimate.
And 20 Americans?
Some of the other helicopters, there were snipers. The Delta teams had snipers on aircraft that were using a modified M14 rifle called an M21, which was a match grade 7.62, and they were circling as snipers. Shugart and Gordon were a sniper team. So when they hit the ground, Shugart had the M14 that was match grade, and then Gordon had an M4 rifle. What they don't actually show in that scene is that some of the crew survived, and they were using the minigun, which was electric, until the power went out to try to defend themselves. But they were overwhelmed by hundreds. 1,000 is a conservative estimate for casualties from what I've seen.
Is that considered a success or a failure?
You be the judge.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A wonderful lecture. But the mission itself, I think in civil military relations, this is maybe the first time this particular incident caused, shall I say, resignation. We military officers might say relief of the Secretary of Defense. The action of not supporting what the military requested was so offensive to Sam Nunn that he engineered the resignation of Les Aspin. Could you comment on that? Because I think the big picture of this is this example of such bravery in the context of the missions that have to be performed politically is really significant. Could you comment on that, please, sir?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Les Aspin resigned shortly afterwards. There were requests that were made for heavier ordnance armor, those other things. There was armor there, Malaysian and Pakistani. There were other things there, but certainly General Garrison asked for things and he was denied based on the assumptions of what the mission actually needed. And that's a controversial point. That's one that still I don't think has been well thought out. Now, I appreciate your question because what it leads up is Adid dies 2 years later in '96. Well, just a little over 2 years later. Michael Durant is captured for about 11 days. President Clinton orders a withdrawal. He negotiates the return. He sends an envoy, a guy named Oakley, who negotiates with Adid's clan the return of Durant immediately while he is also building up forces. Day after this happened, my organization, 2nd Ranger Battalion, was alerted. All the Ranger Regiment was alerted. They end up sending another Ranger company, another Delta Squadron into Somalia. They start to build up in the event that Durant is not returned and the bodies of the crew aren't returned. Adid sees the writing on the wall and immediately cooperates. Durant is returned. He even says in his book, his captors, he knew the minute that they were threatened, that Adid's forces were told, we're now, you've angered the sleeping giant and we're coming. We also flew helicopters over Mogadishu that said, and it's portrayed in the movie, Michael Durant, you're not forgotten, we're going to find you. So the search continued. But, it's a political, as Clausewitz says, war is an act of policy. And this was one small act.
Mission creep.
There can be that as well. There can be mission creep. The movie portrays very well that the soldiers thought it was going to be a 1-hour operation. And although Mark Bowden in his book says, well, nobody really talked about this afterwards, that's all bunkus. The minute this happened, I could tell you from my experience, the Ranger Regiment changed overnight. We started to do things a lot differently. And as we received briefings from those who were there, we watched videos, P3 Orions were filming the whole thing. We changed the way we did business on a great scale. The Joint Special Operations Command did. So were changes that came out of this that made us more lethal and other things? Yeah. Also as a soldier, as an officer and a ranger that watched this, the intensity of the fighting, it's amazing how hard humans are to be killed. That ability, their training saved many of their lives, and the toughness and their ability to fight through things. I mean, that by its, just looking at the numbers that confronted Task Force Ranger, I mean, it's incredible the amount of forces that were coming on them. And they held them off until the relief convoys could come. The Little Bird pilots, the Cobra pilots from the 10th Mountain who were suppressing the enemy throughout the entire fight are really the unsung heroes. That's why I brought a model of an AH-6 Little Bird. Having seen them in action myself, just phenomenal. That's kind of a long answer to your question.
Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that there was a soldier, the Delta Force soldier who was dragged through the streets afterwards. That wasn't in the movie, and I found that interesting because that it wasn't in the film. Kind of wondering why that was the case. I'm sure there was a temporal lag there between when the dragging occurred and when the action stopped. But yes. I was curious if the Defense Department nixed that or something, but in my recollection at the time, it was a very visceral element, a political element here in the United States. That image of the soldier being dragged through the streets was extremely powerful and I'm sure had direct implications for what followed politically and militarily. So it was just your thoughts on that.
I have not read that itself, really the one character change was one of the preconditions that the Department of Defense had. You're going to change this character. It just probably wouldn't have fit in with that. You are meant to experience what the soldiers experienced. right? And so by the time the fighting ends, and as you see that ending scene where the Matt Eversman character is talking with Hooten, the Delta operator, that, which didn't happen, but nonetheless, that sentiment kind of ends. And then the movie ends with the Eversman character wishing his comrades who were killed in the morgue, you know, talking to them as they go home. So I don't know if that would have really, that scene would have fit with what the directors were trying to get. And it was many hours later that was happening. And there was an active search going on, buildup was happening. So, but no, I have not seen anything that says, well, the Department of Defense said you're not going to show that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Dirk, thank you again so much. Thank all of you for coming tonight. Once again, we're 4 days removed from Veterans Day. Thank you so much for your service, and for everybody out there, thank you so much for yours. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving.